Welcome back, and we are looking at the 2000 suspense account question, which is about a garage owner called Jay Reddington. And in the previous video, which you would have watched by now, we have journalized the corrections regarding these 5 errors that were discovered. And that's worth 55 out of the 100 marks in this question. And in this video, I'm going to show you how you can get the remaining 45 by doing parts B, C, and D. So you need to have your general journal. This green panel on the right-hand side of the screen now is the all-important panel. And you have got 5 different sets of corrections with 5 narratives. The narratives just explain what has been corrected, and those are the corrections that we now need to apply to the remainder of the question. So in part B, C, and D, I'm going to show you the overview of all of this first. In part B, we're being asked to create a suspense account, which it's just a little T account with the word suspense at the top. I'm going to show you where to get those numbers and how to balance it. In part C, you're asked to do a corrected net profit. This is the same as the ordinary level videos that you viewed. So you're going to add any credits and subtract any debits to get your corrected net profit. And then in part D, we are going to do a revised balance sheet. Now, I've already done out the numbers here, but I'm going to explain to you where all this comes from. Where do we get these entries from? Well, this is simply a replica of this balance sheet in the question. You see how it's premises and equipment and stock and debtors? Well, here it is also premises and equipment and stock and debtors, etc. So you're rewriting the balance sheet given in the question, but we are going to make the necessary amendments to each transaction that needs to be amended. How do you know what needs to be amended? If it has been changed in the general journal in part A, then it needs to be changed in part B, C, or D. So let's have a look at how to do part B first, which is the suspense account. You are literally going to read down through your general journal, and anywhere where the word suspense appears, that is what is going to be transferred to your general journal. Now, on my Excel, it's going to involve quite a bit of flicking, but you will have the general journal on one page and it'll be easy to find your entries. But I'm just going to read down through. So, with error number 1, there was no mention of suspense because, of course, this was an error of omission. It was completely left out and therefore suspense is not required. However, in error number 2, there is 9,900 suspense on the debit side. We'll keep that in mind. In error number 3, there is a little 7 on the credit side. In error number 4, there is no mention because, again, it was an error of omission. And in error number 5, suspense is mentioned once it's 10,150 on the credit side. So therefore you take those 3 entries and that's what we're going to put into our suspense account. And it's very simple. You put in the first one, 9,900 on the debit side. Now if I had a little bit more space here, I would write the Roman numeral number 1 there because that is referring to, that 9,900 is referring to error number 1. Let me show it to you again. And why do I call it, I would say error number 2 because it's referring to error number 2. And why do I call it creditor, that 9,900? Because that's the number which is balancing against. You see how the 9,900, along with these other things, is balanced against the 22,000, which is a creditor. So you should call that creditor because that's what it's against. You should put a little 2 in Roman numerals there, and it's 9,900 on the debit side. You don't switch sides, you are just summarizing. Then we had equipment. That was from error number 3, and I'm going to call that equipment because the 7 is against the 30 that was equipment in that error number 3. And then in error number 5, I'm going to call this creditor, and it is a little Roman numeral V there for error number 5, and that is this one down here. There's the 7, which was against equipment, and this is the 10,150. And of course, I know it's against creditor and purchase return, but predominantly creditor is the balancing number. So the creditor number is what we enter there of 10,150. The suspense number is what we enter, excuse me, but with the creditor tag. Then you simply balance this account. So what's the biggest side? The biggest side is 10,157. Put that on both sides. And then you take away the 9,900 and you're going to get a balance of 257, which is above the lines on the smaller side. And you bring that down below the lines on the larger side. And that tells you that the suspense figure is a credit balance of 257. Now, if you think back to the original problem we had here, I'm just going to go back to the question. J. Reddington, his trial balance failed to agree at the end of the year, and the difference was entered in a suspense account, and that was included in stock, and we've just discovered that that difference was actually €257. Now, that doesn't mean that those were the only errors. There were other errors which were not affecting the balancing of the trial balance, but did affect our net profit. We're going to look at those in a minute. But that 257, that's what that refers to. That's part B completed. Now, part C, you have to do a corrected net profit. Now, first off, where did I get this original net profit? Well, you get that from the question. And you see here it says net profit is 49,000. So you enter that in there. And then you're going to apply this rule. You're going to add any credits because they would be either an extra income or perhaps a reduced expense. And you're going to subtract any debits. And that could be either an extra expense or perhaps a reduced income. You are going to do that only on the numbers which are on page 1 of your accounts. If you can imagine a 2-page set of accounts, only ones prior to the net profit. Anything on page 2 on the balance sheet, we will fix in part D. So it's only the things which are on page 1. So if you look at your general journal, I'm going to go back in here. Now again, I'm not going to flick forward and back all the time, but you will have the general journal to hand. Capital is a balance sheet item, we'll leave that. But commission is an expense that has to go in. Creditor is a balance sheet. Discount is an income that has to go in. So therefore you go to here and you've got from error number 1. In fact, you could put your Roman numerals here as well, if you wish. You've got commission and you've got discount. Now, one of them is a debit and therefore we subtract it, and one of them is a credit and therefore we add it. Now, what else do we have? Well, the purchases are from error number 2, and that is 11,000. So that is a debit of 11,000, so we need to put that in. The sales returns are from error number 3, and so too are the purchases. And that is a debit of 230 and a credit of 23. The discount is from error number 4, and that discount is that €180 on the debit side. That's discount allowed, remember, and therefore we're subtracting it from to get our new net profit. And the purchase returns, of course, is from error number 5. You put in only the figures which are relevant to the net profit in the trading profit and loss account. You apply this rule, add any credits, take away any debits, and you'll get your new corrected net profit, which is 34,973. Now, many students like to tick off as they do each individual entry here. And if you were doing that, if you were ticking off, you would still find that you have plenty of ones that still need to be attended to, because you have numerous items which are in the balance sheet, have not been dealt with, they're going to be dealt with in part D. So here we go with our part D. What I find quite helpful here is if you kind of write out the skeleton of the balance sheet first. So you can write out all of these terms, premises, equipment, stock, debtors, creditors, bank, and then we look at how they were changed or not, as the case may be. For example, premises never changed, so it's just 200,000 directly from the question. Here's our question, here's our premises directly in. Now equipment is 58,000, but in the question there are two mentions of equipment. Let me see if I can find them to illustrate. There's a debit of 1100 here in number 2, and there is a debit of €30 there in number 3. So equipment is mentioned twice. Now here our rule has to be a bit more accounting related. An asset always has a debit balance. Okay, it always has a debit balance. So therefore, those two corrections were also debit. So therefore, they are going to add on to the debit of the equipment. If they were on the credit side, then they would have reduced equipment because by its nature, it's a debit balance. So therefore, we know that we need to add both of them. 58 plus 1100 plus 30, our new equipment is 59,130. And then you just combine the two of them to get your 259,130, and then we'll move on. Now stock, where did we get that minus 257? Well, that is, of course, our stock of 94,000 includes suspense. We have already learned that the suspense is a credit of 257, so that's why you subtract 257 from the 94,000 because it's a credit in a debit account. So you subtract it away, it's the opposite side to get this number here. Now debtors, 27,000. The 27 comes from the original, and then you have debtors of 230 on the credit side, and you have debtors of 1380 on the credit side. Both of those are credits in an asset account, so we're subtracting both to get this number here. You total them up to get your total current assets. Here is our current liabilities. Now, 3 times we change creditors. But creditors or current liabilities and creditors by their nature are credit entries. So therefore in this one, if the correction is on the credit side, you would add it. And if it's on the debit side, you would subtract it. So you have to switch your rule in this situation. So therefore that 2,650, let's go back up to the top here, creditors, that 2,650 is on the debit side. It needs to be subtracted from our original creditors. The 22 needs to be added to our original creditors. And down the bottom, the 9,680 needs to be subtracted from our original creditors. And when you do that, that's the most difficult one there, 55,490. Bank never changed. You still do your same figuring out to get your working capital. Liabilities away from current assets gives you this. Add it on to get your total net assets. And then we're on to the finance by section. The original capital was 266, but of course we have got one new figure from the very first entry. It is a credit of 5,000. That's extra capital introduced. You remember those two tickets? So therefore that's a credit onto a credit capital account is 271. You put in your new net profit number from part C up here. And you have drawings. Well, drawings have been increased by 1,200. That's a debit onto a debit account. So that is now 14,200. And when you do these three, then you'll get 291,773, which is the balancing number here. And then you know that you've balanced your suspense accounts correctly. At this point, every single entry in your general journal should be ticked off and used. We used all of the suspense entries in part B, all of the trading profit and loss account entries in part C, and all of the balance sheet entries in